The first rays of sunlight crept through the heavy curtains of Adelaide Cottage, casting gentle shadows across the quiet hallways. Inside the royal residence, the morning had already begun with careful precision. Kate Middleton stood before her dressing room mirror, her hand smoothing down the elegant cream-colored dress that had been specially designed for this historic day. The fabric felt different against her skin, heavier somehow, weighted with the significance of what lay ahead. In the next room, she could hear the soft murmur of voices as the children's nanny helped Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis prepare for what would undoubtedly be one of the most important days of their young lives. Kate paused for a moment, taking a deep breath as she watched her reflection. Today, her father-in-law would be crowned King of England, and she would witness history alongside her family. William appeared in the doorway, already dressed in his formal military uniform. The morning light caught the gleaming buttons and ceremonial details that marked his rank and position. He looked every inch the future king he was destined to become, yet Kate could see the familiar warmth in his eyes that had drawn her to him all those years ago at university. "The children are nearly ready," he said softly, moving to stand behind her. His hands rested gently on her shoulders, and for a moment, they stood together in comfortable silence. "George keeps asking about the crown and whether it will be heavy. Charlotte wants to know if she can wave to people, and Louis—" William chuckled quietly. "Louis is more interested in whether there will be cake afterward." Kate smiled at this, turning to face her husband. "They're handling it better than I expected, though I suspect the reality of it all hasn't quite hit them yet." She adjusted his collar slightly, a gesture that had become second nature after years of marriage. "Are you ready for this?" William nodded, though she could see the weight of responsibility in his expression. "As ready as anyone can be for watching their father become king." He paused, looking toward the window where they could already hear the distant sounds of London awakening to this extraordinary day. The streets started filling up hours ago. The police estimate over 1 million people will line the route to Westminster Abbey. From down the hall came the sound of excited chatter, and they both recognized Charlotte's voice rising above the others. She had always been the most vocal of their 3 children, never afraid to express her opinions or ask questions that sometimes left the adults scrambling for appropriate answers. "Mummy, Daddy, come look." Charlotte's voice carried clearly through the cottage, filled with the kind of unbridled excitement that only children could truly express. Kate and William exchanged glances before making their way toward the children's rooms. They found all 3 children gathered around the large window that offered a view toward London. George, at 10 years old, stood with the composure that was already beginning to mark him as future heir, though his eyes sparkled with curiosity. Charlotte, 8 and full of energy, pressed her face against the glass, pointing excitedly at something in the distance. 5-year-old Louis bounced on his toes, trying to see over his siblings' shoulders. "Look at all the people!" Charlotte exclaimed as her parents joined them at the window. "They're everywhere, and look at those big cameras." Indeed, the view showed crowds already gathering along the roads that would soon carry the royal procession. News crews from around the world had set up their equipment, and the morning air buzzed with anticipation that even reached them in their quiet cottage. George turned to his father with a serious expression. "Will Grandpa be nervous, do you think?" The question came with the thoughtfulness that often surprised adults who interacted with the young prince. Despite his age, George already showed signs of understanding the weight of royal duty. William knelt down to his son's level, a gesture that had become natural over the years of fatherhood. "I think everyone gets a little nervous before big moments, George. But Grandpa has been preparing for this his whole life. He'll do wonderfully." He reached out to ruffle Louis's hair as the youngest prince finally managed to squeeze between his siblings for a better view. "And we'll all be there to support him." The nanny appeared in the doorway, a gentle reminder that their schedule was precise and unforgiving. "Your Royal Highnesses, the cars will be arriving in 30 minutes. Kate felt her stomach flutter slightly, not with nerves exactly, but with the awareness that once they left Adelaide Cottage, they would be stepping into history. There would be no private moments, no casual gestures, no opportunity to simply be a family enjoying a special day together. From the moment they appeared in public, they would belong to the nation and the world. Right then, she said, clapping her hands together softly. Final checks, everyone. George, is your tie straight? Charlotte, let me see those shoes. Louis, where are your gloves? The next 20 minutes passed in a flurry of last-minute preparations. Kate helped Charlotte with her small tiara, a family heirloom that had been specially fitted for the occasion. William adjusted George's ceremonial outfit, ensuring every detail met the exacting standards that royal appearances demanded. Louis surprisingly stood still while his mother checked his appearance one final time. As they prepared to leave, Kate caught sight of herself in the hallway mirror. The woman looking back at her seemed both familiar and strange, clearly, herself yet transformed into something more formal, more significant. In a few hours she would be sitting in Westminster Abbey, watching her children witness their grandfather's coronation. The magnitude of the moment settled around her like a cloak. The cars are here, your royal highnesses, came the announcement from downstairs. William took Kate's hand, squeezing it gently. Behind them, the children lined up with the natural grace that came from years of practice at royal events, though Louis still fidgeted with excitement. Ready? William asked, though the question seemed directed as much at himself as at his family. Kate nodded, her free hand reaching back to ensure Charlotte was close beside her. Ready. Together they walked toward the front door, their footsteps echoing in the quiet cottage. Outside, the world waited with cameras, crowds, and expectations. But for this moment, they were simply a family stepping forward together into whatever history had planned for them. The door opened, and the day truly began. The moment they stepped outside Adelaide Cottage, the transformation was complete. The quiet morning sanctuary they had left behind gave way to a world of flashing cameras, security personnel, and the distant roar of crowds that had been building since before dawn. The royal cars waited with their doors already open, engines running quietly, ready to carry the family into the heart of London's historic celebration. Kate helped Louis into the car first, his small hand gripping hers tightly as he took in the scene around them. Despite all his excitement at the window, the reality of leaving their private space seemed to hit him suddenly. Charlotte followed, her earlier enthusiasm still bubbling as she waved to the photographers who had been positioned at a respectful distance. George moved with careful dignity, already conscious of his role and the watching eyes. As their car pulled away from the cottage, Kate noticed how quiet the children had become. The weight of the day seemed to settle over them as they watched familiar countryside give way to the outskirts of London. Through the windows, they could see people beginning to line the streets, many carrying British flags and wearing crowns, made of cardboard and glitter. Look, William said softly, pointing to a group of schoolchildren who had gathered on a small hill. They held homemade signs reading, God Save the King, and Welcome King Charles. When they spotted the royal car, their excitement was visible even from a distance, jumping and waving with pure joy. Charlotte pressed her nose to the window again. They're all here for Grandpa, she said with wonder in her voice. All these people came just to see him become king. And to see us too, Louis added, his earlier nervousness replaced by growing excitement as he began to understand the scale of the celebration happening around them. The closer they got to central London, the thicker the crowds became. The police had created clear corridors for the royal procession, but on either side people packed together as far as the eye could see. Many had clearly been there for hours. Camping chairs, thermoses of tea, and elaborate picnics spread across blankets showed the dedication of those who wanted the best view of this once-in-a-generation event. George watched it all with serious attention, occasionally asking questions about the ceremony that lay ahead. Will there be music during the coronation? He asked. And will everyone stand when Grandpa enters? William answered each question patiently, but Kate could see he was also processing the magnitude of what they were approaching. This wasn't just another royal event. This was the moment his father officially became king, the moment William himself moved one step closer to the throne that would someday be his. As they entered the heart of London, the atmosphere became almost electric. The ancient buildings seemed to vibrate with anticipation, and every window, balcony, and rooftop was filled with people hoping to catch a glimpse of the royal family. Street vendors had set up early, selling commemorative items, and the smell of traditional British breakfast foods drifted through the air from dozens of makeshift stalls. "Mummy," Charlotte said suddenly, "what if I need the toilet during the ceremony?" Kate couldn't help but smile at the practicality of the question. "We'll make sure you don't need to worry about that, darling. There will be a break before the ceremony officially begins." The car slowed as they approached Westminster, and the children fell silent again. Through the windows, they could see Westminster Abbey rising before them, its ancient stones decorated with banners and flowers for the coronation. The building had witnessed nearly 1,000 years of English history, and today it would add another chapter to its remarkable story. Crowds pressed against the barriers on both sides of the road, and the sound of cheering began to filter through the car's windows. People held up phones and cameras, hoping to capture any glimpse of the royal family. Some had painted their faces with the Union Jack, others wore elaborate hats decorated with crowns and jewels. "Wave, children," Kate said gently, and all three began to wave at the crowds. The response was immediate and overwhelming, a roar of approval that seemed to shake the very air around them. Charlotte giggled at the intensity of it, while George waved with the measured grace he was already learning was part of his royal duty. A group of elderly women near the front of one barrier caught their attention. They had clearly been there, for hours, wrapped in blankets and sharing tea from a large thermos. When they saw the royal car approaching, they struggled to their feet, waving small British flags with tears streaming down their faces. One held a sign that read, "We've waited 70 years for this moment." The sight moved Kate more than she had expected. These weren't just spectators. They were witnesses to history, people who had lived through decades of change and were now seeing the culmination of Queen Elizabeth's long reign and the beginning of a new era under King Charles. As they drew closer to Westminster Abbey, the security presence became more intense. Police officers lined every corner, and Kate could see snipers positioned on rooftops. The gravity of the moment was underscored by these necessary precautions, reminding everyone that this celebration was also a moment of vulnerability for the royal family. Louis had grown quiet again, his eyes wide as he took in the scale of everything around them. "Will Grandpa really become the king today?" he asked, his voice small. "Yes, darling," Kate replied, reaching over to squeeze his hand. "Today, Grandpa becomes King Charles III, just like his mother was Queen Elizabeth before him. And someday," Charlotte added with the matter-of-fact tone that children often used for extraordinary statements, "Daddy will be king, too." William caught Kate's eye in the reflection of the car window, and she saw a flicker of something. Not fear exactly, but a deep acknowledgement of the truth in his daughter's words. Someday this would all be his responsibility. Someday he would be the one in Westminster Abbey accepting the crown and the weight of kingship. The car began to slow as they approached their final destination. Through the windows, they could see other members of the royal family arriving, dignitaries from around the world stepping out of their vehicles, and the beginning of the procession that would mark the start of the ceremony. "Are you ready?" William asked his family. The same question he had posed back at the cottage, but now charged with immediate urgency. George straightened his shoulders. Charlotte smoothed down her dress. Louis took a deep breath and nodded seriously. Kate felt her heart rate increase as their car came to a complete stop. In moments, they would step out into the full glare of world attention, walk into Westminster Abbey, and take their seats for one of the most important ceremonies in British history. The door handle was already being reached for by the attendant. Outside, the sounds of the crowd grew louder as the seal of the car was about to be broken. "Together," Kate said softly, and her family nodded as one. The door opened, and London's celebration welcomed them with open arms. The roar hit them like a physical force the moment William stepped out of the car. Thousands of voices rose together in a wave of celebration that seemed to bounce off the ancient walls of Westminster Abbey and roll back over the assembled crowds. Camera flashes created a constant strobe effect, and Kate had to blink several times as she emerged into the bright morning light, her hand instinctively reaching for Charlotte's. The sight that greeted them was unlike anything they had experienced. Before, even after years of royal engagements, Westminster Abbey stood majestically before them, its Gothic towers reaching toward a sky that had cleared to a brilliant blue, as if nature itself wanted to provide the perfect backdrop for this historic day. Red carpets had been laid across. The ancient stones and flowers in the royal colors decorated every available surface. George stepped out with careful composure, but Kate could see his eyes widen slightly as he took in the scale of the celebration surrounding them. The crowd stretched as far as they could see in every direction, a sea of faces and flags that represented not just Britain, but people who had traveled from around the world to witness this moment. Louis emerged last, and for a moment, Kate, worried he might be overwhelmed by the intensity of it all. But her youngest son surprised her by immediately waving to the crowds, his natural enthusiasm overcoming any nervousness. The response was immediate, a fresh surge of cheering that seemed to lift the spirits of everyone present. "Stay close," William murmured to the children, though his voice was barely audible over the noise. The family formed a small group, moving together toward the Abbey's entrance where other members of the royal family were already gathering. As they walked along the red carpet, Kate became aware of the incredible number of cameras focused on them. News crews from dozens of countries had positioned themselves to capture every moment, every expression, every gesture. She could see the distinctive equipment of major networks, and knew that millions of people around the world were watching, their every step. Charlotte handled the attention with natural grace, offering small waves to different sections of the crowd, and occasionally stopping to smile particularly brightly when she noticed children among the spectators. Her confidence seemed to boost George's comfort level, and soon both older children were acknowledging the crowds with the kind of warmth that had always endeared the royal family to the British public. Near the Abbey steps, they encountered other arriving dignitaries. Kate recognized heads of state from across Europe, representatives from the Commonwealth nations, and members of other royal families who had come to witness Charles's coronation. The gathering represented a remarkable collection of world leaders, all united in this ancient ceremony. "Aunt Anne," Louis called out suddenly, spotting Princess Anne among the arriving family members. His genuine excitement at seeing a familiar face in the midst of all this formality brought smiles to many of the watching faces, both in person and undoubtedly among the television audiences around the world. Princess Anne approached them with her characteristic blend of warmth and efficiency. "You all look wonderful," she said, taking a moment to adjust Louis's collar with the practiced ease of someone who had been attending royal ceremonies for decades. "The crowds are extraordinary today. I don't think I've ever seen anything quite like it." Indeed, the atmosphere was electric in a way that seemed to energize everyone present. Kate could feel it herself, a sense that they were all participating in something truly historic, something that would be remembered and talked about for generations to come. As they approached the Abbey's entrance, the sound of the organ began to drift out from inside, its deep, resonant notes adding a sense of sacred solemnity to the celebration happening in the streets. The contrast was striking. The joyful chaos of the crowds outside and the ancient formal ceremony that waited within the Abbey's walls. "Look up there," William said quietly to the children, pointing to the Abbey's towers where flags flew in the gentle breeze. "Those flags represent all the countries where Grandpa will be king. The Commonwealth stretches all around the world." George followed his father's gaze with serious attention. At 10, he was beginning to understand the global scope of the responsibilities that would someday be his, and Kate could see him processing this information with the thoughtfulness that was becoming characteristic of his personality. Inside the Abbey, they could hear the sound of the choir beginning their warm-up exercises. The voices blended together in perfect harmony, creating an atmosphere that was both celebratory and deeply reverent. Kate felt a shiver of anticipation run through her as she realized that in just a short time, they would be sitting inside those ancient walls watching Charles accept the crown that had been worn by monarchs for over 1,000 years. "Mummy," Charlotte whispered, tugging gently on Kate's dress, "will Grandpa look different after he becomes king?" The question was so innocently profound that Kate had to pause for a moment before answering. "He'll be the same Grandpa who loves you very much," she said softly. But yes, in some ways he will be different. He'll have new responsibilities and a very important job to do for all the people here, and many more around the world. The crowds continued their enthusiastic celebration, and Kate noticed how many people were crying, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming emotion of witnessing such a significant moment in their nation's history. Many held up signs expressing their support for the new king, while others simply stood in respectful silence, clearly moved by the magnitude of what they were experiencing. A protocol officer approached them discreetly, indicating that it was almost time for them to enter the abbey. The moment had arrived when they would transition from being part of the public celebration to becoming participants in the ancient ceremony itself. "Are the children ready?" the officer asked quietly, and Kate looked around at her family. George stood straight and composed, every inch the young prince he was growing into. Charlotte practically vibrated with contained excitement, her eyes bright with anticipation. Louis held William's hand tightly, but his expression showed curiosity rather than anxiety. "We're ready," Kate confirmed, though she felt her own heart rate increase as she spoke the words. William took a deep breath, his military training evident in the way he squared his shoulders and prepared for what lay ahead. "Together," he said, echoing Kate's earlier words, and the family began to move toward the abbey's entrance. As they walked up the ancient steps, Kate was struck by the thought that these same stones had been climbed by countless generations of British royalty. Queen Elizabeth had walked here for her own coronation over 70 years ago. Kings and queens stretching back through centuries of British history had made this same journey. The massive doors of Westminster Abbey stood open before them, revealing the incredible sight within. The interior was filled with guests from around the world, the ancient architecture decorated with flowers and banners, and at the far end, the area where Charles would soon accept the crown. The organ music swelled as they crossed the threshold, and Kate felt the weight of history settling around them like a cloak. They were no longer just a family attending an important event. They had become part of the continuing story of the British monarchy, witnesses to and participants in a tradition that stretched back over a millennium. Behind them, the crowds continued their celebration, their voices carrying even into the sacred space of the abbey. Ahead lay the ceremony that would transform Charles from heir to king and change their family forever. The interior of Westminster Abbey took Kate's breath away, despite having visited the ancient building many times before. Today, it had been transformed into something that seemed to exist between the earthly and the divine. Hundreds of candles flickered throughout the space, their warm light dancing across stone walls that had witnessed nearly 1,000 years of British history. The morning sun streamed through the stained glass windows, casting pools of colored light across the assembled guests and creating an atmosphere that felt both intimate and impossibly grand. Every seat in the abbey was filled with dignitaries, heads of state, members of parliament, and representatives from organizations across the Commonwealth. Kate recognized faces from around the world, presidents, prime ministers, and fellow royalty who had traveled great distances to witness this moment. The sight reminded her that this ceremony wasn't just about Britain. It was about the continuation of an institution that touched lives across the globe. William guided the family to their designated seats in the front section, reserved for the immediate royal family. The children moved with careful grace, clearly aware that hundreds of eyes were watching their every movement. George walked with the dignified bearing that was becoming second nature to him, while Charlotte's eyes darted around the abbey, taking in every detail of the incredible scene surrounding them. "It's so big," Louis whispered as they settled into their seats, his voice filled with awe. Indeed, the abbey seemed even more vast than usual, its Gothic arches stretching impossibly high above them, decorated with banners representing the various Commonwealth nations and military regiments associated with the crown. Kate helped Louis arrange himself properly in his seat, ensuring his ceremonial outfit was perfectly in place. Beside them, Charlotte sat with unusual stillness, clearly overwhelmed by the grandeur of their surroundings. Even she, normally the most vocal of the three children, seemed to sense the sacred nature of what was about to unfold. The organ music that had been playing softly as guests arrived began to swell, signaling that the ceremony was about to begin. Kate felt her heart rate increase as she looked around the Abbey one more time, trying to absorb every detail of this historic moment. The air itself seemed charged with anticipation, and she could feel the collective held breath of nearly 2,000 people gathered in this sacred space. "Look," George whispered, pointing toward the altar area where the Archbishop of Canterbury and other religious leaders were taking their positions. The Archbishop wore his most formal vestments, and the ancient regalia that would be used in the ceremony had been arranged with precise care on the altar. Kate's eyes were drawn to St. Edward's crown, sitting on its cushion near the altar. The solid gold crown, studded with semi-precious stones, seemed to glow in the Abbey's light. In just a short while, that crown would be placed on Charles's head, officially making him king. The thought sent a shiver of emotion through her as she realized she was about to witness one of the most important moments in modern British history. William reached over and took her hand, squeezing it gently. When she looked at him, she could see the mix of emotions playing across his face. Pride in his father, awareness of his own future role, and deep love for his family. Today would change everything for all of them, marking the beginning of a new era in their lives and in the life of the nation. The great doors of the Abbey swung open again, and a hush fell over the assembled crowd. The procession was beginning. First came the clergy, moving with solemn dignity down the aisle, followed by representatives of the armed forces carrying regimental colors. The sight was both beautiful and deeply moving, representing the various institutions that served the crown. Charlotte leaned forward slightly in her seat, trying to get the best possible view of the procession. Her earlier excitement had transformed into something deeper, a sense of reverence that showed she was beginning to understand the true significance of what she was witnessing. Beside her, Louis sat unusually still, his eyes wide as he took in the pageantry unfolding before them. The music swelled again, and Kate knew that Charles would soon appear. She thought about the man she had come to know as a father-in-law over the years of her marriage to William, his passion for environmental causes, his love for his grandchildren, his dedication to duty that had shaped his entire life. Today, all of that would be recognized in the most formal way possible. "There he is," George said softly, and Kate looked toward the Abbey's entrance to see Charles beginning his slow walk down the aisle. He wore the crimson velvet robe of state and moved with the dignity befitting the moment. But Kate could see the emotion in his face as he took in the incredible scene before him. The sight of Charles walking toward his coronation brought tears to Kate's eyes. This was the culmination of a life spent in preparation, the moment he had been trained for since birth. Behind him walked Camilla, equally composed and dignified, ready to be crowned queen consort. The couple moved together with a grace that spoke of their deep partnership and shared commitment to the role they were about to assume. As Charles passed their section, he caught sight of his family and offered the smallest of nods, a private moment of connection in the midst of this incredibly public ceremony. Louis waved slightly before Kate gently guided his hand down, but Charles had seen the gesture and smiled, a flash of the grandfather they all knew and loved showing through the formal ceremony. The procession continued toward the altar, where Charles would take his oath and accept the crown. Kate watched every step, knowing that she was witnessing history being made. The ancient words of the ceremony had been spoken over British monarchs for over 1,000 years, creating an unbroken chain that connected this moment to the very foundations of the nation. "Mummy," Charlotte whispered very quietly, "does this mean Grandpa won't have time to play with us anymore?" The question, innocent and heartfelt, captured something Kate herself had been thinking about. How would this change their family dynamic? How would Charles balance his new role as king with his role as grandfather? She leaned down to whisper back, "Grandpa will always make time for you, darling. Being king just means he'll have more important work to do, but he'll always be your grandpa first." William overheard the exchange and squeezed Charlotte's hand reassuringly. Despite all the formality and ceremony surrounding them, they were still a family, and the bonds between them would endure regardless of titles or crowns. The Archbishop of Canterbury began to speak, his voice carrying clearly throughout the Abbey's vast space. The ancient words of the coronation service filled the air, connecting this moment to centuries of British tradition. Kate found herself holding her breath as the most solemn part of the ceremony approached, the moment when Charles would accept the crown and become king. Around them, the assembled guests sat in respectful silence, everyone aware that they were witnessing something that happened perhaps once in a lifetime. The weight of tradition, history, and responsibility seemed to fill the very air of the Abbey, creating an atmosphere unlike anything Kate had ever experienced. The moment was approaching when Charles would kneel before the altar and accept the crown. Kate reached for William's hand again, knowing that they were about to see his father transformed from heir to king, and their family's future forever changed in the process. In the hushed atmosphere of Westminster Abbey, with centuries of history pressing in around them, the coronation of King Charles III was about to reach its climactic moment. The silence in Westminster Abbey was so complete that Kate could hear her own heartbeat as Charles approached the altar. Nearly 2,000 people held their collective breath, and even the children seemed to sense that they were about to witness something truly extraordinary. The Archbishop of Canterbury stood ready with St. Edward's crown, the ancient symbol of British kingship that would soon rest upon Charles's head. Charles knelt before the altar with a grace that spoke of years of preparation for this moment. His crimson robe spread around him like a pool of royal authority, and Kate could see the emotion in his face, a mixture of solemnity, determination, and deep awareness of the responsibility he was about to accept. Behind him, Camilla watched with quiet dignity, ready to support him as he took on the weight of the crown. "Will all present stand," announced the Archbishop, and the sound of nearly 2,000 people rising together filled the Abbey like a great rustling of wind. Kate felt Charlotte's hand slip into hers as they stood, and she could sense the little girl's excitement mixed with the reverence that had settled over all of them. William stood beside her, his military bearing evident, in the straightness of his posture, but Kate could see the emotion in his profile. This was his father accepting the crown that would one day be his own. The weight of that future responsibility seemed to settle around William's shoulders like an invisible mantle, and Kate squeezed his hand in support. George stood with remarkable composure for a 10-year-old, clearly understanding the historical significance of what he was witnessing. His great-grandmother Elizabeth had been crowned in this same abbey over 70 years ago, and someday, many decades in the future, he too might stand in this same position. The thought was both overwhelming and somehow comforting in its continuity. The Archbishop raised St. Edward's crown high above Charles's bowed head, and Kate felt tears spring to her eyes. The crown caught the light streaming through the Abbey's ancient windows, its gold and jewels creating a moment of pure radiance that seemed to symbolize the divine nature of kingship itself. "By the grace of God," the Archbishop began, and the ancient words filled the sacred space with power and meaning that seemed to reach back through centuries of British history. Kate could feel the weight of tradition in every syllable, the unbroken chain of monarchy that connected this moment to the very foundations of the nation. Louis, despite his young age, seemed mesmerized by the ceremony unfolding before them. His usual energy had given way to an almost mystical stillness, as if he instinctively understood that he was witnessing something sacred and unrepeatable. The moment arrived. The Archbishop lowered the crown slowly onto Charles's head, and in that instant everything changed. Charles was no longer the heir, he was the king. The transformation was both visible and invisible, marked by the physical weight of the crown but extending far beyond anything that could be seen or touched. "God save the King," rang out from the Abbey's rafters, and the sound was immediately taken up by every voice present. Kate heard herself joining in, her voice mixing with William's, with the children's, with hundreds of others in a great chorus of celebration and allegiance. The words seemed to lift toward the Abbey's vaulted ceiling and beyond, carrying with them the hopes and loyalty of a nation. Charlotte's voice was particularly clear as she called out the traditional words, her childish treble somehow adding to the power of the moment rather than diminishing it. This was her grandfather they were honoring, but also her king, and the duality of that relationship was something she was just beginning to understand. The trumpets sounded, their bright notes cutting through the air with triumphant clarity. The sound seemed to shake the very stones of the abbey, announcing to all present and to the world beyond that Britain had a new king. Kate felt the music in her chest, in her bones, as if the celebration had become part of her physical being. Around them, the assembled guests erupted in careful but heartfelt applause. Heads of state, prime ministers, members of parliament, and representatives from across the Commonwealth all joined in acknowledging the historic moment they had just witnessed. Kate could see tears on many faces, evidence of the deep emotion that the ceremony had stirred in people from all walks of life. Charles, now King Charles III, rose from his knees with the crown secure upon his head. The physical transformation was remarkable. He seemed taller somehow, more imposing, as if the weight of kingship had actually changed his bearing. But when his eyes found his family in their seats, Kate saw the same warmth and love that had always characterized his relationship with them. The ceremony continued with the crowning of Queen Camilla, her own moment of transformation as she accepted the crown that would make her Charles's partner in this incredible responsibility. Kate watched with admiration as Camilla handled the moment with quiet dignity, clearly ready to support her husband in the monumental task that lay ahead of them. "Look at Grandpa now," George whispered to his siblings, and Kate could hear the wonder in his voice. Indeed, Charles did look different, not just because of the crown and ceremonial robes, but because of something deeper, something that came from within. He had accepted a role that would define the rest of his life and the lives of his family for generations to come. The religious service continued with prayers and blessings that had been part of British coronations for centuries. The Archbishop's voice carried clearly through the abbey as he asked for God's blessing upon the new king and queen, invoking divine protection for their reign and for the nation they would serve. Kate found herself thinking about the future as she listened to the ancient prayers. How would this change their family life? How would Charles balance his new responsibilities with his role as grandfather to George, Charlotte, and Louis? How would William prepare for the day when he would stand in his father's place? The children remained remarkably well-behaved throughout the long ceremony, clearly sensing the importance of the moment. Even Louis, normally the most restless of the three, sat with unusual stillness, his eyes fixed on the altar where his grandfather had been transformed into a king. As the religious portion of the ceremony drew